Hello, this is Property Matters, a weekly catch-up on the world of property, supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. And we're live every Sunday from 10 a.m, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and our website, propertymatterstv.co.uk. If you're watching on our website, please leave us a Google review. And if you're watching via social media, get involved in the comments section below. Our email address for any discussion topics that you suggest that we might want to do, hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk. If you don't have time to watch us, of course, on a Sunday, you can watch us on the move with our podcast. You can get it from our podcast platforms there. You can see on the other side of the screen, wherever you choose your podcast, just simply search Property Matters TV and you'll find them there. And also the show is broadcast across the week on Dilsey Radio, so we welcome listeners there. So let's get on with our weekly stories and let's talk to our property expert, Joe Joshi. Morning, Joe.
Good morning, Paul. Good morning, everybody. Good morning to our listeners and viewers, and thank you for your support every week, week in, week out. And we're glad that we actually bring you stories and information about the property world as it comes.
Interesting first story, and I'm surprised we haven't really covered this one together earlier in our 3-year history. This is the fact that the traditional estate agent, we all know the high street is changing. We've lost the big retail giants and the high street fashion stores have all gone online, it seems. But one of the things that you still see in most high streets is the odd branch, an estate agent's branch, Joe. But of course, do they really need to be there these days, whereas so much comes through Rightmove and other online platforms?
Interesting. Well, we have kind of covered this over the years, probably not directly, but indirectly in various shapes and forms. But a good point to bring to the program. The reality is, yes, of course, the high street has changed and is forever evolving and changing. And certainly over the last, 2-3 years over pandemic, I think we saw a very fast forward change of the high street, especially when people are starting to have deliveries delivered or even online and working from home and all the other things that we've discussed, in our programs about property and how people use property the best way. Estate agency really is in UK way behind by comparison. The US, of course, back even almost 30 years ago, were already using the operation of brokers or freelancers, where people actually worked independently and perhaps used one hub in an area, though they had lots of one hubs in the area, but they weren't actually high street presences as such, because US doesn't really have the high street presences. And back then, we tried to bring in through franchising people like the Century 21 concept, but the British people are so stayed in their way that it was just something that wasn't acceptable, even though now pretty much every other operation is a franchise operation. And in the same way, high street, it's about what you get used to. You feel that that's the right thing to do constantly. I, for one, have obviously changed my model many years back, where we don't actually have the high street presence, because I don't feel that we actually need it. And it's interesting that someone is bringing that up now, whilst we've done that and you've known that. We've done that for the last 10, 15 years almost, that we didn't have a high street presence, primarily because people don't come into the branches as they used to in the high street. They don't visit the high street the way they used to before. So there's no reason for anyone to be in the high street. However, the high streets are very, very important. They are a center hub to every town, and how well they're presented and what they actually have actually values the whole of the town. And when you've got, poor brands, rubbish brands in your high street, it really tells everybody else how rubbish the town is. And that's the saddest thing about it, because towns are judged by the high street, and yet the high street is now no longer. And in this particular game, this estate agency game, it is very expensive to be in the high street. You do not need to be in the high street. I mean, last year alone, I think close to 5,000 estate agents across the UK, and certainly probably 150, 200 branches have actually shut down. And they're doing that more and more. I was yesterday in Wales and found that basically, the whole high street was full of only but estate agents, probably because that's probably what they use it for. Everything else was takeaway shops and perhaps Poundland or pound shops or whatever they call them. So, it doesn't take the image right. But the question is, do estate agents need to be in the high street? The answer is no, they don't anymore, any longer, because most people are using portals such as Rightmove, Zoopla on the market, and many others that are available to the marketplace. That said, there is still a breed of people that wish to go and have a discussion about their property. And why not? Because property is one of the most important purchases you will ever make in your life, whether it's a purchase or a rental property. You need to understand, and sometimes sitting in front of someone and understanding the mechanism, the whole process, etc., is important. So there is still a need for some sort of base, but I don't think it needs to be the high street.
Yeah, you're right. There was 150 branch closures last year, and certainly in terms of retail uses, estate agency was one of the worst performing in terms of shrinkage across the year. It's interesting, isn't it? Because there definitely seems to be two schools of thought. There's plenty of people saying, no, I'm not closing my branches. We're a hub of the community. We're a central part of the community. And some comments on this story, for example, suggest that that actually the lit up window, as you can see in the picture there with all the backlit photographs, is a great marketing tool which is there, and also gives confidence that the branch is or the company is effective and doing the job it's doing because it's in the high street. And they were saying that the number of people that come through the door definitely has gone down, but there are still plenty of people who walk in and say, do you charge for valuations? And still walk in and have never even realised that there are property portals.
So yes, I agree with part of that. The fact that the marketing tool is a really good tool, and a high street requires that, and it does tidy up the high street, and it also gives confidence, trust, and all those other points as far as the agency is concerned and their presence in the town. Being a part of the community, yes and no. There was a time when it was important to be part of that community, but the community has evolved so much that actually most communities don't care about their own community. So let alone an agent wanting to care about that community, it's really quite a challenge. There was a time, and I can go back to a situation where we had village offices, and it's the same as the banks, Paul. If you may remember, all these things were community orientated. There was a nationwide branch or a Halifax branch or something in the middle of the village somewhere, and or part of another operation because it formed some level of community hub. Well, they all went because nobody wants to really go to the branch, and if they do want to go to the branch, it's the case of a certain sector that will go to the branch. The problem with majority of that is it's costing. That's what the bottom line is. You're having to staff that place. You're having to pay the rates and the rents and so forth. Obviously, the electrics, all the utilities have gone up. So now the question really is, do you need to be in the high street? Unfortunately, the answer is no, we don't. And yes, there is an element of marketing, but that marketing is now done through lots of other medium, especially social media. But a very small sector of that is one that actually goes to the shop, goes to the office in the high street, and to form a part of a community and to form part of. And if you look at the numbers, if you had 100 people, you might get 2 that walk through the door now. It's pretty abysmal, really. Whereas there was a time when you'd probably come Thursday when I go back when we used to have the property news, delivered outside on a Wednesday night. By 12 o'clock, people had actually gone past us, ripped the whole thing up to take their property papers so that they can digest it over the coffee and start to be the first to call the next morning. It's all gone down to the smartphone, hasn't it? It's on everything on the smartphone, and that's what people want to do.
Yeah, I mean, there is a powerful argument for the online. I mean, not least the job quality of life for the person working there. They don't have to sit in the branch from 9 till probably 7 of an evening. They can work from home, and that obviously gives you greater flexibility and makes the job of estate agency more appealing.
Well, this is exactly what the American style had, and we weren't prepared to accept it. And now all of a sudden, like I said, we're behind the clock. All of a sudden, everybody thinks this is a great idea. Actually, the idea was there 30 plus years ago, and the Americans brought it. They brought the brokerage situation, and the real estate broker was live and kicking. When I went to Atlanta, Georgia back in, I don't know, 30 odd years ago, this was what they were doing. They had open houses, they had brokers, they had conventions, they had all these things that were going on. But we had the stiff upper lip here. One doesn't do that, and this is not how it is. And we don't wear yellow coats or gold coats or all that kind of stuff that they came up with. But here we are now. Pretty much every other person, every other operation is a franchise operation. Every other person is now looking to become a broker. And if you look through and see how many people are now, just tagging on, because quality of life, ease of life, not only for the brokers and for the agents, but also for the employers and the companies, because all of a sudden they're not paying for someone to look and do their nails or do whatever they're supposed to be doing and being on the phone to their mates at their time and their cost. They're doing that in their own time, and if they're not actually, selling property or doing it, they're not earning any commission out of it. So, yeah, it has evolved. It is changing, and I think for the better, personally.
Yeah, I think we're seeing more and more future online, not in the high street. That's for sure. Let's move on to our second story, our second topic, and a golden oldie has reared his head in the name of Robert Jenrick. Remember him? One of our 14 housing ministers we've had in recent years, who has been urging this week Rishi Sunak. He stood up in the Commons this last week to cut stamp duty, our old favourite, to provide a boost to house building and the wider housing market. He recently resigned, of course, as the immigration minister over the Rwanda legislation, and he raised the issue in the House of Commons during Prime Minister's questions. And he said that a reduction in the levy would boost demand for housing, help a greater number of first-time buyers in their efforts, and get a foot on the housing ladder, and encourage developers to build much more needed homes. Now, of course, we did have a cut in the stamp duty at the beginning of the pandemic. Did you think it achieved what he said there, Joe?
Well, look, what it achieved as far as the pandemic was concerned, and the cut there was obviously, there was a different target at that time. The race for space, people want to get out. We were in a lockdown as a country. The world was in a lockdown, and we know historically building is the way out of any situation. And so, we needed to do that. And at the time, it was a good idea. It's not a bad idea at any time, to be perfectly honest with you, Paul. But we know that stamp duty is not going to get cut. It's money for old ropes for the Treasury. And Generic is probably just another of the million people that just revitalizes what we all say every day for everyone and for the same purpose. I can't think that it's anything new, but I guess he had to stand up and say something. And that was his call. I can't see that they are going to bring the stamp duty down. They may do something for the first-time buyers, but in the grand scheme, at the moment, they're trying to make sure the inflation stays down, and don't want to really stir it up, but at the same time want to stir up some property aspect. As I have said many times on our programs, they use the property market as a complete yo-yo when it suits them, and when it suits them, they'll bring in all these tools of stamp duty and not stamp duty and so forth. Thank you very much, Mr. Generic, but to be honest with you, I don't think you are hope in hell. And to a large extent, it's nothing new. You're not coming up with anything new. You just felt that you had to say something, so you've said something. But as far as I'm concerned, I can't see them bringing that down. I think interest rate is probably more driven right now than it is a stamp duty. The interest rate part of it, is actually hurting the people every day. Stamp duty is one of those things that hurts on the basis that when you are buying or when you are actually transacting. So there are many other things that government can probably see that they can do, but I'm not sure that they will do stamp duty at this moment. But you know what? It's a Pandora's box, isn't it? With our chancellor, you never know. He might turn up with some magic.
Well, he doesn't look like he's got a lot of money to do so. Certainly, the OBR are suggesting that he had 35 billion to play with in his autumn statement in November, but only have 14 billion in his next one. But I think personally, from what I remember, we reported on the stamp duty holiday, all that achieved to do was to make prices rise even faster and make first-time buyers' homes even more expensive and out of reach. So. And also, you could argue, as indeed Rishi Sunak said in his answer, that already stamp duty does not come in until 250, so the majority of first-time buyers don't pay any at all.
That's right. Like I said, I think Robert is just, saying it's a space filler. It's something that he probably had to do. He really didn't think about what he said and brought to the table. And of course, one of the 14, 15, 16, or I don't know, 20 ministers for housing, it really doesn't carry a great deal of weight, because that's how much they value the housing market. They change a minister like they change bed sheets probably, or have hot dinners. It's just not something that they value, and anything that comes out of the mouth of these ministers isn't particularly valued either. But yeah, in my mind, yes, the house prices do get affected, but Paul, they get affected whether it's stamp duty, whether it's interest rates, whether it's cheap properties that are being offered 95%, 100% mortgage. They'll do every trick in the book to try, and each one of them will motivate people to some point, and each one of them will increase house price. House price is never going to be. We've reported, I think, in 50 years, the reverse gear was probably about 5 times, and which is and minuscule. It wasn't as if it was like earth shattering. It was just showing that it actually reversed in the market in value 5 times. There's been corrections, but 50 years of 5 times is actually minuscule in comparison to what actually happens in the housing market. And we know that everybody loves to purchase, loves to want to buy or even rent their first home, because it's about making that first step. So I don't see that there's going to be enough money, but like I said, you never know, there might be a surprise.
Well, Sunak said, since 2010, we've delivered 2.5 million additional homes, on track to deliver 1 million just in this Parliament. So that suggests, almost 5 years, probably 200,000 a year. Over 850 families into home ownership. They've helped through the schemes such as Help to Buy and Right to Buy. So that's dodging the question. And also, of course, he made the point that tax decisions are the matter for the Chancellor, who then said that he wouldn't have enough money on the ITV Peston show to do very much in the spring budget. So I think they've probably dodged the bullet there. But I mean, it's probably more likely to be things like Help to Buy schemes that are going to come back rather than necessarily stamp duty gestures, don't you think?
The Help to Buy is likely to be probably extended more, and maybe this 99% mortgage might even show its face for a little while. And those are the areas, but I certainly don't. I mean, it'd be surprised if they do anything with stamp duty.
Indeed. Okay, let's take a look at our third story this week, and this is an interesting one. And we haven't talked about conveyancing and solicitors for quite a while, actually, so it's good to get this old chestnut out again as well. It's a particular guy, a female, Ruth Beaton, I beg your pardon, who is a qualified solicitor, and she's been conveyancing for 20 years. And over the most recent few of these years, she says, I, and most likely all of you reading, have practiced through the COVID pandemic, through the stamp duty holiday, and through those fateful final days of the Liz Truss era. In these brief years, I've seen a lot of solicitors leave the profession, many of them completely burned out, and a lot of new starters enter, young, qualified, and at the foot of their careers. It's the biggest staff turnaround I've witnessed, and it should be invigorating the sector. But they are coming into the job and an industry that looks nothing like it did 20 years ago, a job that has lapsed into the mundane. As solicitors in modern conveyancing, we no longer practice law. Instead, we spend most of our time arguing about whether a boiler has been serviced or electrics have been tested, not the legal points of the title. And I have to say, I mean, I haven't done any conveyancing for a while, but I do hear of these stories where people say, well, I'll only take it at that price if you do this and you do that. They're almost there to sort of like oversee the bartering, as opposed to, when I remember doing my last conveyancing a few years ago, it was about, who's got access to the drive, is there a shared drive, that kind of thing. And I think that's what she's saying, isn't it?
Yes. So in the first instance, there's a huge section, a part of what things and who should be doing this. So when a transaction has been agreed, a purchase has been agreed, really it's down to the agent at that time to set out what has been agreed. More often than none, the enthusiasm of most agents is the fact that they've got a sale. And as long as they've got a sale, they stick the two names of the solicitors, the names of the buyers on a memorandum, and, hey presto, let the solicitors then sort that out. And that's probably a huge and fatal mistake for starters. So really, the problem and the duty lies with the agent, not the solicitor. Now, if they'd done their job correctly in the first place, as we used to back in the day, we would write in the notes or in part of the memorandum the things that we agreed. Now, I'm winding the tape back a long time now here, Paul, but we would say, for example, we used to have arguments over curtains and carpets, where people don't do that now. But you could spend a week, 10 days arguing whether the wife liked the curtains and wanted to have them included in the purchase price, or whether the husband couldn't give a monkey about it, or whether the carpet was new, or whether they would leave the carpet, or would they rip it out, and all that kind of stuff. And you would spend, I can't tell you, when I think about it, it's sickening. Like we could have spent, weeks discussing carpets and curtains. So I empathise with the lady solicitor who talks about this and says, we should be doing our job as opposed to be discussing perhaps the other bits that may relate to the sale. Second part of that is that the solicitors are not, whilst they're qualified to do perhaps the legal aspect, they're certainly not negotiators in terms of whether the boiler or the curtains or the carpets or the cooker is going to stay in the kitchen or wherever those. So the template should always be set out on the basis that when a sale has been agreed, as part of the notes, as part of the agreement, there should be a list of other things that have been agreed in that, which would include things like the carpets, the curtains, the kitchen equipment. If they're even buying a sofa that's in there, it should be all listed out so that when the transaction gets in front of the solicitor says, okay, here's a list of all those. So that's fine. I'll tick those. That's done. Now let's look at the actual document. Look at the conveyance. That's what they're there for. That's the whole idea of having a conveyance, is to check the legal documents, check the rights, check the title, check any covenants that may be, advise on those, advise on the mortgage situation, advise on those are the things that the solicitor should be getting involved in. So what happens is, because the agent hasn't done their job properly, the solicitor ends up spending extra time on what is probably not necessary at all. So it's a training aspect, and it's a timing issue. Back in the days when we were doing estate agents, we were taught that that's what you do. Now it's about targets for agents, and the targets are how many viewings online, how many calls, how many phone calls you're making, all of that kind of stuff. And it's actually not about the real job, and it's not their fault. That's just the way the world's gone. And their trainers are probably just as lousy, because they are a new breed of people who now deal with things online, on through the computer or on the tablet or whatever's on the CRM, whatever they tick in the system, whichever company has created the CRM that tells them how to tick a box about certain things. And if they don't tick those boxes, it doesn't get done. It's the old adage: if your name's not at the door, you're not going to get in. So the same situation here applies. So I agree with the conveyancing solicitor to say that people are burnt out. They are doing perhaps aspects of the job that they shouldn't be doing, and probably not concentrating on the job that they should actually be advising people on, and so forth. The other side of that, of course, is that it's all become online, hasn't it? So half of the solicitors people never meet. I remember the day when solicitor would call in the buyer and talk to them over the desk, go through the whole transaction, tell them what they're buying, what they're selling, what they're getting involved in, get them to sign and book a time. Now you have no idea who's doing what. So it doesn't have the same, I don't know, je ne sais quoi, it doesn't have the importance that it really should do. And the reason it doesn't have that importance is because people don't have the time to give it that importance, because they're bogged down with things that they probably don't need to do.
Yeah, she says it's largely due to a change in client expectations. It's gone from nobody caring whether or not the boiler has been serviced to the buyer's solicitor saying, we're going to advise our client not to proceed if you don't get your client to service the boiler prior to completion. But I don't care about the boiler, she says. I care that the transaction adheres to all the current legislations and laws. After 20 years, I'm no longer looking for extensions to breach it. Yeah, I'm no longer looking for extensions that breach a restrictive covenant. I'm arguing about boilers, and our young solicitors are not being allowed to do the job they've worked so hard to train for. I mean, surely that is the job of the agent to get all that kind of stuff sorted out in the first place. It shouldn't be the solicitor's job. That's all about the legalese.
Well, like I said, a good agent would have ticked most of those situations off before they got to the solicitor. So a solicitor should have a memorandum of sale along with, a list of the agreements of what has and what hasn't happened. But that doesn't happen. I mean, they get involved in, as I said, the excitement of the sale just basically means, here it is, let's put that together and chuck it and let the solicitor. That is what takes the time. That is what, drags the situation out. A transaction that could be done in, days, perhaps within weeks, takes months. And that takes months because the job at the beginning hasn't been done correctly. If the job was done correctly at the outset, it's the same as getting a lawyer instructed, Paul. Most people will not instruct a solicitor or a lawyer or whatever the terminology is until they get a sale on it. Really, truly, a solicitor should be instructed the day the agent is instructed so that they can start to parallel, along with the sale, some of the areas that they need to deal with, some documents they may require, some management structures from flats and so forth, and building blocks, some insurance, all of the, the tedious things can start to come in so that by the time a sale happens, the solicitor is actually able to provide a proper pack to the buyer solicitor and say, here you are, here's your package. Now, I've dealt with everything that I think. If there's any particular questions you want to raise, come back to me. Otherwise, we're good to go, So that timing can happen. But of course, people don't do it. They don't do it for two reasons. One, they don't know they should do it. And two, money. Nobody wants to spend money. But what they don't understand is they're already spending some money and they're going to spend even more money when a transaction doesn't happen. So you do instruct someone at the once a sale happens, and the time is wasted, and then a few weeks later, the buyer turns around and says, "Actually, you know what? We've changed our mind. We found something else." So what happens is they wasted that time, and now they've wasted their money. Actually, if they'd done what they should have done at the beginning, maybe that transaction, that cooling off period, that change of mind, that other opportunity may not have arisen. They may have actually exchanged contracts on the property and bought it. So half of the situation and half of the problem lies within themselves, really.
I don't understand why this hasn't been thought about. I mean, she suggests there's a simple change that's required to provide an upfront information pack from the seller to the prospective buyer via the agent. Now, it's true that the property industry has literally resisted the idea of upfront information for years, and I don't understand why, really, because all these things are obviously common things that are asked of a solicitor, because she said it's all about the boiler or whether the electrics have been tested. So surely it wouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility that there could be a legally binding form that you have to fill in that says, yes, the electrics have been tested, or no, they haven't. The boiler is this, and all those things that they regularly do. Surely that should be available to the prospective purchaser from the estate agent from the moment they go on the market.
Look, we had the HIPS. I don't know if you recall that.
Yeah, I knew you were going to mention that. Yeah, your favourite document.
Yeah, that nobody ever came along to actually look at. We have the EPC that nobody nowadays. I mean, there's probably more people now that take care of, but most people never bothered to look at. It was just another self tax implemented by the government. Oh, if you don't do this, we do this. We don't do that, we charge you this. Loads of people were trained up on HIPs. Loads of people were trained up on EPCs, and it didn't go. Some of that actually had some good points to deal with, but nobody actually picked it up. And these solicitors that talk about the situation are probably just as at fault of not dealing with those hips in the right direction. And today we are discussing a fact that somebody says we're not doing our job properly. Well, not doing your job properly because you had the chance to do your job properly and you didn't do it. And maybe that was 20 years ago before this lady's time. But the fact is that we've tried and tested all these formulas over the period. And the reality is very simple in my book, and that is that if you provide enough information up front, the transaction is much smoother throughout. It's because nobody cares and nobody wants to do those things. It takes more time, and time is money. And the interesting thing is they're not prepared to spend it up front, but they'll spend heavily at the other end because now they need to do it. So it's a needs must. Obviously our public isn't educated well, other than the fact that they know that they want to buy, they'd like to buy, and they know it's worth more money when they sell it. Those are the driving factors. It's not about the rest of it. So I think the fault, if such, lies both with agents and with solicitors. And agents would be seen as, saviors, really, if they did what they should do probably up front more so than they do. I often hear about it when people say, oh, we've done this and we've been on the market for 6 months or 8 months or 2 months, or whatever it is, but we haven't heard anything from them. It's that dead period that I recommend that people should utilize more effectively and say, right, we've got this, so let's get all these other ducks in a row in the meantime. Let's talk to the customers. Now, as an auctioneer, we know that is fantastic. It really is, because we're getting all of that information way up front. We're creating a legal pack, and we're giving the buyer a legal pack with as much information as possible up front, so they can make an informed decision to whether they want to buy or they don't want to buy. And if they took the same view on residential sales, and perhaps not, drop the gavel under auction terms, they would speed up the process hugely in order to get their transaction through and their sales through. So there is a tool, there is a mechanism that lies and works. It's just that people think, oh, wait, it's not for me. That's the way the problem comes. That's not for us. We don't do that, so it's not for us to do. But it really is.
I mean, she says it's a win-win for all involved because the seller avoids a fall through, the buyer wastes less time of their own time, and the estate agent expedites the whole process and brings forward their payday. So, I mean, if you take an analogy, she says, you wouldn't book a holiday without looking at the hotel, and you wouldn't buy a car without knowing the mileage and maybe looking at the service history. It just seems common sense to me. And as you say, it already exists in the auction world.
Yeah, absolutely, and I fully endorse the dilemmas this lady has, but unfortunately, it's the teaching of the system, and the next generation are not. They're not in that. It's what says on the CRM pool, and that everybody goes by that. The computer management system that they have on the basis that does it have an appropriate box? Does it have the thing that I need to tick? And have I ticked it? And that's all that matters. But then someone's got to follow that up, but they don't. So going back to our earlier subject, does the estate agent exist on the high street? Well, part of that was about the service, about coming in and talking to somebody. And so, well, we don't. We're a faceless business now. And so people don't ask those questions. And so is the solicitors. There was a time when, as an exchange of contract, you would go in, with your partner or whatever, or you're on your own, and see your solicitor, sit with them for half hour, 40 minutes, or whatever the time allocated. They'll go through the transaction, they'll go through the conveyance, and they'll tell you the pitfalls, they'll give you their advice, and they'll say, if you're happy with that, sign here, and give me the deposit, and I'll exchange contracts for you. You don't do that. They don't even see them. There's somebody up in the north, somebody in the south, and somebody out working out probably Timbuktu online. And so the whole thing has changed. But on the face of it, it shouldn't have changed because it is the most important purchase that you'll ever make.
Well, on that bombshell, we must end this week. We have no more time. So thank you, Joe, for all your comments on our interesting stories this week. Hope you found them inspiring to yourself. We'll be back with some more stories very soon.